Hello and welcome to Good Conversations. As you know, we broadcast from the studios of SKC-TV here at Salish Kootenai College. So we're especially honored to open a new series of interviews with Dr. Luana Ross, who became SKC's president in 2010, succeeding the college's co-founder, Dr. Joe McDonald. An enrolled member of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes, Dr. Ross received her BA from the University of Montana and her PhD in sociology from the University of Oregon. The author of Inventing the Savage, she taught at Montana State, UC Berkeley, UC Davis, and the University of Washington before coming home last year. Thanks, Dr. Ross, for taking the time to be on the program.
Thank you.
Well, you're now in your second year as SKC's president. Do you have any overall reflections on the job so far?
I do, and the first reflection is Joe McDonald made it look very easy. And when I visited with Joe about that, he said the reason he made it look so easy is he grew up with a college, and I did not. So Joe McDonald is also a hard act to follow. And so my first year was quite a transition year. And I think overall, in a nutshell, I would say I was flying by the seat of my pants. But having gone to the Harvard Leadership Institute, it turned out that at least 90%, maybe more, I'll say, of what I did was right. And the other 10% is easy to correct. And so that's the good news.
That's a pretty good batting average.
It is. It's really good. So I feel like I'm doing really well. But the big thing to me is around this whole concept of transition. And I'm somebody who loves change. And not everybody loves change, it turns out. And so I also felt like the first year I was the only person going through change and was a little egocentric about that. And upon reflection, everybody was in transition. And so I think it was fun for some people, difficult for other people. And so reflecting back, I wish that at the onset I would have been mindful of everybody is in transition. It's not just you. But that's okay because it worked out, and I talked a lot about transition. And one of the things that I think is important for people in any institution to think about is when you're static as an institution, it's not good. Change is good. It's a dynamic process, and it allows you to learn lessons that you wouldn't have learned before. And then the other thing I think reflecting back has to do with making mistakes. Many people are saying, well, did you make any mistakes? And I say, of course I made mistakes. Who doesn't make mistakes? You know, we're all human, right?
Yeah. We had a recent White House administration that was famous for saying it never made mistakes.
Oh, well.
There's a little unhealthiness in never being able to face mistakes, isn't there?
I agree.
Yeah.
It is unhealthy. And so I think it takes courage to face them head on, which I feel I did. And it takes courage to say you're sorry, and I made a mistake, and I did a lot of that, and to me that's good. That's very healthy.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting. I mean, I imagine it's even harder doing this kind of transition when a college has had a president for so long that was the founder, 30 years or more. I mean, that must have made it extra challenging.
It is.
Yeah.
It continues to be challenging. And so one of the first things I did was read 3 different books on how to transition into being a college president. And then I shared the books with Joe, and so that we were on the same page because he's also in transition. People forget that.
Right.
You know, he's transitioning out, I'm transitioning in, and there were some very good studies that talked about how to transition out and how to transition in. But the core to those studies that they had in common was The longer a person is at an institution, Joe McDonald, 30 plus years, the smaller the area, rural Montana, the harder it is for that person to transition out and the new person to transition in. So they actually had a list. It will be helpful if you do this, this, and this. And Joe thought the list was fantastic, and I did too. And so we followed the list, and of course we were in touch with each other. And I think that made it much smoother for me, and I would hope for him too. But if I could just add, we continue to work together as a team though, and I really like that.
That's great. And are there items from that list that come to mind?
Well, the first one was, and I think it was hard for Joe and it was difficult for me too, is it's really important for the former president or president emeritus in this case to stay away from the college for the first 6 months because people are going to be so used to going to him or her and saying, you know, what is the new president doing or why can't I do this or now she's changing that. And so that's the one that comes to mind that was difficult for both of us.
Kind of ripping the Band-Aid off a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, have there, I mean, in a way you've already touched on this to some degree, but are there other aspects of the job that have surprised you since you've taken the helm?
Yes, I didn't realize the amount of time I would spend on correspondence or in meetings. And that was surprising to me, and particularly because I'm new and I've been away from a tribal college system has totally different funding than mainstream institutions. So I had a lot to learn, so I had to spend a lot of time in meetings and a lot of time in correspondence. And so time management became crucial. And so what got lost in that, because I was working, I don't know, 10 to 12 hour days, 7 days a week. And you can't do that. You can't continue that.
No,
and
it's not sustainable.
No, it's not. And so my mother said, don't do that. It's not only oppressive, it's going to be depressive and you'll become a depressed person. So quit doing that.
Smart woman.
Oh yeah, very smart. And be sure and take time for yourself. So I started thinking about the taking time for myself because I'm somebody who usually gets up and does yoga the first hour, gets ready, walks or bikes for an hour in a day, and I had absolutely no time to do that. And so it forced me to think about my health and the health of the employees. And so I am encouraging myself as well as the employees and students too at SKC to be mindful of their health. And work is important, but so is your health.
Absolutely. Well, that's very interesting. And what do you, at this point, you've been president for over a year. What do you, are there strengths and weaknesses of the institution that, in your view, are kind of a different list than when you first came into the job?
Well, I'm not sure if I would place them in terms of strengths and weaknesses. Well, strengths, yes, and then weaknesses, I'm not sure if that's a word that I would use. But the really good thing about coming into SKC is it is indeed the flagship tribal college university. And I always thought we just said that because we're from here. And I assumed other people said the same, whatever reservation they're from, but that's not the case. It turns out that SKC is the flagship tribal college in the US and Canada. Now there are a couple nipping at our heels now, and so we need to be mindful of that. But that was such an amazing position to step into, to be the president of the flagship tribal college. So that's a good thing, but it also means that people are watching you all the time. The press wants to know how you're doing. People in the community want to know how you're doing. And so that can be a little daunting, and that's where the courage part of leadership comes into play. And so I started reading a lot about leadership, and The three qualities from the literature that I remember is you have to have a focus, which I do. You have to have a passion. If you don't love what you're doing, it's not going to work. And I absolutely love what I'm doing. And you have to have courage. But integrity, it turns out, is the most important quality. And so you need to be honest at all times. And so what I've tried to do, that I think Joe just did over time, but what I'm trying to do is to be very transparent. And that's part of that personal integrity that then will reflect on the integrity of the institution. And so I set up committees that Joe did not have in place because he probably didn't need them, because he was here.
Yeah.
And he was such a part of the institution. And then here I was new. And so one of the committees that I have is a budget and planning committee. And I have faculty and staff on that committee, and I will add a student. And they are part of the planning for the whole institution. They prioritize where our money should go, how to get the money, what to do with the money. And so that's part of the transparency.
Yeah, that's very interesting because it's probably the great stressor for an institution like this is budget. I mean, is that true? A lot of
It's absolutely true.
Yeah.
And what's going on this year are huge financial woes for everybody.
Right.
Not just educational institutions, but for everybody.
Yeah.
And so I felt lucky that SKC was able to hang on to every single employee last
Amazing.
year.
Right.
So hooray for us.
Yep.
But that wasn't just me making those decisions and making sure that that happened. It was a committee of 7 people.
Yeah, well, that's what I was thinking, is that oftentimes budget issues split apart an institution because people who aren't involved or don't understand the choices that the institution is facing then don't understand why something is reduced or something, money went here or there. And it sounds like this committee, one of the advantages of having it is that it'll help offset that syndrome.
I'm hoping
Yeah.
that's the case. I've never seen such a committee at a mainstream institution. And so I think it's fantastic and that it's working very well.
And is there a way to communicate between the community, the committee and the larger?
Well, I would hope so. And my understanding is Tim Olson is one of the faculty members, that he is in direct communication with other faculty, or that they would feel free to visit with him about their concerns that he can bring back. We don't have a faculty senate. We have a curriculum committee that operates somewhat like a faculty senate. And so that's probably something that we need to look at to make sure that their voice is heard. Because it is my opinion that the 2 most important groups of people on a college campus are your faculty and your students. And they need to be empowered in many different ways. And so I've been thinking this year about different ways to empower them. So I know the curriculum committee is there and it does work like a faculty senate. And there's also a very strong student senate group. But we need, I feel like we need more student representation on different committees. It's not always there.
Very interesting. Well, we're going to take a quick break for our viewers. Please don't go anywhere. We'll run some fast facts for you and be right back. And welcome back. We're continuing our conversation today with Dr. Luana Ross, SKC's president. Thank you again for taking the time to be with us. Before the program, you were talking about the break, you were talking about time management issues. And I was just going to offer that this is a very efficient use of your time to reach out to the community.
It is. Thank you.
As long as everyone tunes in and watches. I guess at about the same time, within a half year or so, you took over at SKC, Waded Cruzado took over at MSU, and Royce Engstrom took over at the University of Montana.
Yes.
Have you been kind of going forth in some kind of coordination or communication?
We have, and it's been fun and very interesting. For example, Waded Cruzado and I have mutual friends in common. And so when they installed me here as the new president, I asked her to keynote as a way to get to know her better. So she came, we had a fantastic time, we've developed a great friendship, and I thought it was very interesting that she made it very clear to me that MSU is here to serve tribal colleges and the Native community, not just the non-Native community. And so that was a wonderful surprise for me.
Yeah.
And Royce Engstrom I had met several years ago when Dan and I were visiting with the journalism department and looking at their media arts department, and got to know him then and developed a relationship with him then. And so for the past 2 years I've had an acquaintance with Royce that has developed into a friendship. And so we are in communication with each other. We visit with each other about common problems and how to solve them. And I think it was about 2 weeks ago, Royce invited all of the tribal college presidents to the University of Montana campus. And we had a day-long conference with him about how the University of Montana can serve tribal colleges. And so to me it was a new day. It's an exciting day for the state of Montana. And so it's just great to be in touch with them.
Yeah. Well, what do you think are kind of some of the initiatives you hope to get developed more in terms of increasing that working relationship or the way the university can support?
Well, the first one I'm thinking of is sustainability. And
let's jump ahead and talk about that. Okay. Yeah. What's this about?
Because I was in touch both with MSU and U of M about sustainability initiatives that they have going at their campus that I was struggling to get going here.
Yeah.
And so I did notice that they were in the news around the Go Green efforts, and I was having some difficulty, and so they were very helpful, particularly the University of Montana because they're closer. I have access to their sustainability officer. We don't have the money for that position. And so Mary Driscoll, God bless Mary Driscoll, is donating some of her time to help me do that.
Wow.
So Mary Driscoll and I together are the one sustainability officer, and that's a position I hope to get funded in the next year or two. But for example, the use of pesticides and herbicides on campus, I had not a clue what would be safe and what would not be safe.
Yeah.
Jason Netwick, our grounds guy, is very interested in the green initiatives, but he needed some training. And so he knew that he could go to the University of Montana and ask them anything because I had such a close relationship with the institution.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Right, that absolutely is. And what about, I know that a lot of campuses are moving pretty aggressively to try to become green campuses, to reduce their carbon footprint in particular because of the overwhelming issue of global warming, the greatest environmental challenge humanity perhaps has ever faced. And are there efforts in that area here on campus?
There is, and there's a commitment on the part of university and college presidents that is a petition that's been circulating. And when you sign this commitment, then they have benchmarks and criteria that you have to meet. And when I read the benchmarks and criteria, I noticed it was more suited for a university that had more money than we did. But I thought, I'm not going to be complacent, and I'm not going to let that stop me. So I went ahead and signed the agreement, and I thought we just need to do the best that we can do. But one of the first things they want you to do is a baseline environmental assessment of your campus. We have absolutely no money for that. And so I'm looking in other places for that to happen. Any of your buildings should be LEED certified. Those are very expensive.
Yes.
So that's one piece. The other part of that that's related is I also know that thinking about the environment is a luxury. That when you're concerned about how to feed your kids and how to clothe your children, that the last thing on your mind is the environment. But at the same time, we can't afford to be complacent.
No, because in the long run, that does affect how whether we can feed our children.
Exactly, exactly. You know, the whole idea of food sovereignty, which is quite a movement now, not in the mainstream, but in Native communities, and thinking about the amount of pesticides that are on our foods that are indeed making people sick. And then looking at heart problems and diabetes rates and so on, that we can't be complacent, that we really need to be mindful about food sovereignty as well.
Yes, and that was an initiative of Wilma Mankiller's, wasn't it?
Oh,
with
was
the Cherokee
it really?
Nation? I think it was.
Yeah.
And I've often thought that this reservation could probably grow all the food consumed here.
I agree, and there's a phrase that Orrin Lyons uses, and it's "thank you for being well." And he said that's a common greeting where he's from, and it forces you to think about your health. And that to me is tied to the environment too. And so when I greeted the faculty and staff this fall, I talked about that phrase, "thank you for being well." And our motto last year was create community, and we talked a lot about being a community within a larger community and what that meant. And this year it's recycle, responsibility, and respect. And so we have banners around campus. Every piece helps, I think, that there will be a psychological thing that will happen when people see recycle, be responsible, and be respectful. And so it's not just the relationship that we have with each other or with the larger community, but it's the relationship that we have with the land as well.
And of course, that goes to the core of SKC's mission, doesn't it? As far as tribal cultural values.
Yes.
And
And we've been talking a lot about that too, because the mission is to provide an education, and it's in the context of the cultural values.
So, the whole sustainability initiative, in a sense, is a way of meeting that part of SKC's mission of cultural teaching.
Yes, it is.
Well, we're getting towards the end of the program. It goes by so quickly. But I'd like to ask, in kind of the big picture, how you see the role of tribal colleges generally, and SKC in particular, in relation to their communities, and maybe also in the context of tribal history.
Oh, I love tribal colleges. I think they're the best thing that happened to education, not just Indian education. And I like how they've evolved and developed over the decades. I think tribal colleges first were started because of the high push-out rate and the racism that we saw in the educational system, and they've evolved to a place of power, and where our knowledge systems are now being recognized as very credible and something that other people are interested in.
So, in some sense, these colleges are an expression, a reflection of sovereignty.
Yes, oh, you bet. Yeah, and a very good reflection of sovereignty. Yes.
It's interesting to me that you assume the helm here in the centennial year of the opening of the reservation to non-Indian settlement, which was a violation of the Hellgate Treaty in 1910, and in some ways was the low ebb of tribal sovereignty.
It really was the low ebb, so look how far we've gone now.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, we have 2 minutes to go, but if you can, just in a nutshell, summarize your vision of SKC's future.
In the near future, I see SKC as still being the flagship tribal college in the U.S. and Canada. And when I think about, say, 10 years from now, I see us as a leader in Indigenous education. And that, of course, would include more of an emphasis on languages. And so I'm very interested in starting a language institute here, and I've been in communication with key people around the reservation regarding that. And so that's where I see us in 10 years.
That's very exciting. And what about in 50 years?
Oh, in 50 years, let's see. How old will we be, Tom?
I don't want to go there, but
well, in 50 years, it's a little hard to think 50 years. Well, what would? Oh, never mind how old I'd be. But I see us as having the same respect and credibility as mainstream institutions, but really being a mover and a shaker in the Indigenous universities movement. And that's great. That's exactly where I'd want us to be.
Yeah. Well, I guess in Salish, yepanune.
Yes.
Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you.
And to our viewers, thank you for watching. And please remember, contribute to KSKC-TV to keep this and other local programming on the air. Thank you for watching.